Okay, let's dive even deeper into the fascinating, and sometimes bewildering, world of moral philosophy. We're not just talking about what's right or wrong, that's a whole other can of worms, a debate as old as time itself, and frankly, one that could go on forever. Today, we're putting on our detective hats, but instead of a classic whodunit, we're investigating a profound what is it? Specifically, what is a moral judgment? And what in the world are we actually doing when we make them? What's the nature of this thing we call morality? Think about it. We toss around moral judgments like confetti at a parade. Genocide is horrific. Giving to charity is a good thing. Stealing that last slice of pizza was just plain wrong. But have you ever stopped to wonder what these statements really mean? Are we stating objective facts about the universe, like the sky is blue, or gravity makes things fall, or is something else, something more nuanced going on? Philosophers, those intrepid explorers of the mind who ponder the deep questions that keep us up at night, have noticed some, shall we say, abstract moral pronouncements too. Stuff like, kind action is right only if it maximizes overall happiness. Sounds impressive, right? Maybe even a bit like a wise old guru on a mountaintop. Or how about, one ought to always act in a way that one could will one's reason to be reasons for everyone else. Now that's a mouthful. These are called abstract moral judgments. The kind ethical philosophers make when they're trying to build grand theories of right and wrong. Now, we're not here today to argue about whether these specific moral judgments, be they everyday ones or the fancy philosophical kind, are correct. That would be like trying to decide the best flavor of ice cream, a recipe for endless debate, a delicious but ultimately unwinnable battle. Instead, we're putting on our philosopher hats, adjusting our metaphorical monocles, and examining the status of these judgments. Are we, when we make a moral judgment, uncovering objective truths about the universe like scientists discovering the laws of physics? Is there a moral fabric, woven into the cosmos, waiting to be discovered? Or are we just describing our own personal feelings, our gut reactions, like saying I love the taste of cilantro, or I hate it, if you're one of those people? Or perhaps we're simply echoing what our society thinks, the norms and values we've absorbed since we were kids. Or is it even simpler than that, just a matter of expressing our emotions, a verbal equivalent of cheering or booing? This is the heart of what it means to explore the status of morality. It is like asking if morality is a feature of the universe that's out there, waiting to be discovered, like some hidden continent, or if it's something we humans cooked up ourselves, like a delicious or sometimes not so delicious stew of ideas and feelings. To get a better grip on this, let's play a little game, a thought experiment. Imagine we're meticulous sorters, organizing statements into two distinct piles: empirical judgments and moral judgments. Empirical judgments are claims about the world that we can check with our senses or through experiments like, the earth revolves around the sun, lead is heavier than iron, or it was sunny in Edinburgh today. We can test these things out, observe them, measure them, gather data. They're about the stuff of the universe, the things we can see, touch, and quantify. Now, for the moral judgments pile. Here we'd put things like, Cain's killing Abel out of jealousy was morally bad. Or Oedipus sleeping with his mother Jocasta was morally bad. Yikes, that's a heavy one. We might also add, Pol Pot's genocidal actions during the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia were morally abhorrent. Notice how different these statements feel from the empirical ones. We can't exactly put wrongness under a microscope, can we? We can't measure goodness with a ruler. These judgments seem to be about something else, something beyond the purely physical. So, here's where it gets really interesting, where the plot thickens. Many people, philosophers included, feel in their bones that there's a fundamental, deep-seated difference between these two types of judgments. Some argue that moral judgments can't be true or false at all, they're just opinions. Subjective preferences, like saying chocolate ice cream is the best, or pineapple on pizza is an abomination. Though that last one might be objectively true, others say, hold on a minute, they can be true or false. But what makes them true or false is a different beast altogether. Maybe it's not about objective mind-independent facts, but about what a culture or an individual believes. A sort of moral truth is in the eye of the beholder situation. And then, there are those bold thinkers who argue, no, moral judgments are about objective facts, just like empirical judgments. They believe that when we say genocide is wrong, we're talking about something real and true, something independent of what any one person or group thinks, something woven into the very fabric of reality. These three viewpoints, that moral judgments are objective, relative, or just expressions of emotion, are like different lenses through which we can view the mysterious landscape of morality. Philosophers, never ones to shy away from a good label, have fancy names for them. Objectivism fee morality is objective and universal, relativity is relative to individuals or cultures, and emotivism morality is about expressing emotions, a kind of sophisticated furra or boo. Over the course of this intellectual journey, we'll explore each of these lenses in more detail. We'll examine what makes them appealing, where they might stumble or run into trouble, and how they engage in lively, sometimes heated, debates with each other. It's going to be a bit of a roller coaster, a thrilling ride through the twists and turns of philosophical thought, but a fun and enlightening one, I promise. And don't worry about having all the answers right now. The goal isn't to find the one, true, definitive answer. Philosophers are still arguing about this, but to understand the questions, to appreciate the different ways we can approach them, and to develop our own critical thinking skills. One more thing before we jump in with both feet. I'm going to use some examples of particular moral judgments as we move forward, and some of them are a bit like stepping on a landmine, controversial, to say the least, but that's on purpose. I want you to see why thinking about the status of morality is so important, why it matters, and why philosophers have been wrestling with these questions for centuries. Just remember, we're not trying to settle whether these examples are right or wrong in some absolute sense. We're using them as tools, as case studies to dig deeper into the "what is it?" question, to peel back the layers of this onion we call morality. So, are you ready to embark on this philosophical adventure? Grab your thinking cap, a healthy dose of curiosity, and maybe a sense of humor, because this is about to get interesting, maybe even a little weird. Let's uncover what exactly is going on when we make moral judgments, because this seemingly simple question opens the door to a vast and fascinating universe of thought, a universe where we grapple with the very nature of good and evil, right and wrong, and what it means to be human. Okay, let's dive into the messy, fascinating, and sometimes hilarious world of right and wrong. We're not just talking about whether you should put pineapple on pizza, a debate for another time. Perhaps we're talking about the big stuff, the kind of moral judgments that make us question everything. Things like, is genocide wrong? Or is polygamy okay? Are these statements like scientific facts, personal opinions, or something else entirely? It's enough to make your head spin. Think of it this way: we're all amateur moral philosophers, stumbling through life, trying to figure out what's what. And just like any good detective show, we've got some suspects to interrogate, some theories to test out. These are the different ways philosophers have tried to make sense of morality, and they're all pretty intriguing, even if they don't always agree. First up, let's imagine we're trying to answer three fundamental questions like a philosophical to-do list. 1. Truth, opinion. Are moral judgments the kind of things that can be true or false in the first place? Or are they just opinions, like your preference for a certain genre of music? Is saying, cheating is wrong, fundamentally different from saying, vanilla is the best ice cream flavor? 2. What makes it so? If moral judgments can be true or false, what's the magic ingredient that makes them that way? Is there a secret universal code of conduct hidden somewhere? Or is it something a bit more down to earth? 3. Universally true. And if they are true, are they true for everyone, always? Or does morality change its tune depending on who you are and where you're from? Is it a universal law like gravity, or more like a local custom like bowing versus shaking hands? All right, let's meet our first philosophical contender, the idea that morality is objective. These folks are like the moral realists of the group. They believe that moral judgments are based on facts, just like the statement, "The earth revolves around the sun," is a fact. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not, it's just true. Similarly, objectivists think certain things are just plain wrong, regardless of personal feelings or cultural norms. Genocide, for example, isn't just frowned upon by some, it's objectively abhorrent, a violation of some fundamental moral truth, they might say. It is like saying 2 + 2 = 5 is wrong. But if morality is so cut and dry, why all the disagreement? Why do cultures clash over things like polygamy? Some see it as wrong, others as perfectly acceptable. This is where the objectivist position gets a bit shaky. They're great at explaining disagreements about objective facts, like whether the sky is blue, but they struggle with these more subjective moral quandaries. It feels a bit like imposing your own views on others, doesn't it? Now, let's bring in a different perspective, the idea that morality is relative. This is like the go-with-the-flow philosophy. Relativists acknowledge that moral statements can be true or false, but they believe that truth is in the eye of the beholder, or rather, the culture. Think about driving on the left side of the road. It's the right thing to do in England, but absolutely wrong in the United States. Relativists see morality in a similar light, different rules for different groups. Within relativism, we've got two main variations to the "it's all about meh" approach. Subjectivism, this is like saying a she is delicious, is only true if you personally enjoy sushi. Subjectivists argue that moral judgments are essentially just statements about our individual feelings. X is wrong simply translates to I don't like X. This explains why we often act in accordance with our morals. We're drawn to what we like and avoid what we dislike. But can it really account for serious moral disagreements? If it's all just personal taste, why do we argue about things like human rights? When two cultures clash over a practice, it does not seem like they are just describing their own feelings. 10. The one in Rome approach to cultural relativism. This version is a bit more nuanced. It claims that moral judgments are true or false relative to a specific culture. So, polygamy is wrong, might be true within a culture that prohibits it but false in one where it's widely practiced and accepted. It's like saying it is wrong to wear white after Labor Day. There is no deep reason for it. It is just a cultural convention. Finally, let's introduce a real curveball, the idea that morality is just an expression of emotions. Emotivism. These folks are the rebels of the philosophy world, throwing out the whole idea of moral truth altogether. They believe that when we say, stealing is wrong, we're not stating a fact or even an opinion, we're just expressing our disapproval. Like yelling, "Bore. That's awful." Similarly, saying that charity is good is like shouting, "Hooray," a pure expression of positive feelings. This view, like subjectivism, can explain why our morals are so closely tied to our actions. We're driven by our emotions after all. But it faces a similar problem when it comes to disagreement. If I'm just saying, "Boo, injustice," and you're saying something else, are we really having a meaningful disagreement? Emotivists say it's a disagreement in attitude, not about facts, but that might feel a bit unsatisfying. It also makes it hard to say one is right or wrong when they agree or disagree with a moral statement, which is something we do all the time. So, there you have it, 3 wildly different perspectives on this whole morality thing. It's a complex, messy, and endlessly fascinating debate. There are no easy answers, and that's okay. By wrestling with these different theories, we can sharpen our own moral compass, understand the roots of our beliefs, and maybe, just maybe, learn to navigate this crazy world with a little more wisdom and empathy. It's a journey of self-discovery, a philosophical adventure, and it's far from over. What resonates with you? Are you on Team Objectivism, Emotivism, or somewhere in between? The conversation continues, and your voice matters. This stuff is not just for dusty old books. It is playing out all around us, all the time. Okay, let's dive into the fascinating world of right and wrong. No life vest required. Just your thinking cap. Ever found yourself wondering what makes something morally good or bad? Is it all just, like, one big opinion fest? Or is there some kind of ultimate truth about morality hiding out there in the universe? These aren't just random thoughts you have in the shower. These are the heavyweight questions that have been knocking around in the brains of philosophers for, well, forever. And guess what? You're invited to the mental party. Picture this. You're hiking and you hit a fork in the trail, 3 paths, each looking totally different, all leading into this dense, mysterious forest. Each path is like a different way of thinking about morality. Let's take a stroll down each one, see where they go. First, we've got the Objectivism path. This one's like the science road to morality. People on this path, let's call them objectivists, they're convinced that moral truths are just as real as gravity or the fact that pizza is delicious. They believe saying lying is wrong is a fact about the universe, just like saying the sky is blue. It's not just an opinion, it's a statement about how things actually are. Sounds pretty solid, right? But wait till you see the pothole on this path. Next, we stumble upon the relativism trail. This path is way more winding and, well, relative. Relativists reckon that morality is kind of like fashion. It changes depending on where you are, who you're with, or even just your mood. What's considered cool in one place might be totally uncool somewhere else. Like, imagine wearing socks with sandals with fashion crime in some places, totally normal in others. Morality, according to these folks, is all about perspective. Finally, we hit the emotivism trail. This one's a bit feely. Emotivists think that when we make moral judgments, we're not really making statements about facts at all. Instead, we're just expressing our emotions. It's like when you say, volunteering is awesome. You're not stating some universal truth, you're basically shouting, "Way for volunteering." It's like cheering for your home team. You're not claiming they're objectively the best, you're just showing your support. So, here's the big question: which path actually leads to the truth about morality? Honestly, that's the philosophical equivalent of asking what the meaning of life is. It's a question that sparks endless debates, the kind that can go on all night and involve way too much coffee. It is the core question in meta-ethics. This is the branch of philosophy that thinks about morality itself. There's no easy answer, and honestly, that's part of what makes it so interesting. It's like trying to pick the best song ever. Everyone's got their favorite, and nobody's necessarily wrong. Perhaps a mix of the above-mentioned views is the key. But, to make things even spicier, let's throw some banana peels on each of these paths. Why? Because challenging our beliefs is how we learn and grow. By finding the flaws in each view, we can see if they're sturdy enough to stand on, or if they just kinda collapse. It's all part of the fun of philosophical exploration. Here's the problem with objectivism: if moral facts are really out there, floating around like, say, the laws of physics, why can't we just, see them? We can use science to prove all sorts of things, but how do we prove a moral claim? If someone says, bullying is wrong, how do we objectively verify that? It's not like we can weigh it on a scale or measure its temperature. Relativism has its own headaches. If morality is all relative, how can we say we've made any moral progress? Take something like gender equality. Most of us today think it's important, but in the past, many people were totally against it. If relativism is right, were those people in the past right for their time? Does that mean we haven't really gotten better? Morally speaking, we've just changed our minds, like switching from flared jeans to skinny jeans. And emotivism? Well, it has to deal with the fact that we often use reason to arrive at our moral conclusions. We don't just go with our gut, we think things through, we debate, and sometimes we even change our minds after a good argument. If morality were just about emotions, how could we use logic and reason to figure out what's right or wrong? Oedipus thought sleeping with his mother was okay, until he realized it was his mother. So, can these theories dodge these banana peels? That's where things get really interesting. Philosophers, being the clever folks they are, have come up with all sorts of creative ways to defend their favorite theories. Objectivists might say, hey, we can figure out moral truths through careful thinking, just like we figure out math problems. Or they might argue that moral truths are connected to things we can observe, like human happiness or suffering. Relativists might reply, look, cultures can overlap and we can still make judgments about the past from our own cultural perspective. It's not like we're totally cut off from other times and places. They might say, sure, we use reason, but our emotions can be rational too. We can reflect on our feelings and strive to be consistent in our values. And so the debate goes on like a philosophical tennis match with no end in sight. Each side keeps refining their arguments, coming up with new twists and turns. It's a never-ending quest to figure out this whole morality thing, and it's a journey that anyone can join. So, what's your take? Which path seems most likely to lead to truth? Are you on Team Objectivism, Team Relativism, Team Emotivism, or maybe Team I'm still thinking about it? The cool thing about philosophy is that there's no single right answer. It's all about the exploration, the questioning, and the joy of stretching your brain. Let's keep this conversation going. It's way more fun than arguing about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. It does, by the way. It was great discussing this with you. Okay, buckle up, philosophy explorers. Because we're about to take another joyride through the twists and turns of morality. We've been grappling with some seriously juicy questions, and I'm here to add a bit more fuel to the fire, in the most playfully inquisitive way, of course. Think of it as a philosophical jam session where we riff on ideas, toss around thought experiments, and maybe even stumble upon a few aha moments along the way. One question that's been buzzing around like a curious bee in a field of ethical flowers is this: can a moral principle be both universal, like a cosmic law etched in the fabric of reality, and adaptable, like a chameleon changing its colors to match its surroundings? Imagine a universal principle as the North Star, always there, guiding our way. But does that guiding light shine differently depending on where we are on Earth? For instance, could the seemingly contradictory customs of headscarves for women in some cultures and hatless heads for men indoors in others actually stem from the same underlying principle, something akin to respect local customs? It's like having a universal remote that works on any TV but requires different button combinations for each model. If this is possible, Does it mean that the line between objectivism, the idea that moral truths are out there, independent of us, and relativism, the notion that morality is a cultural construct, gets a little blurry? Are we looking at two sides of the same coin, rather than two separate currencies? Now, let's flip the script. What if we all agree on a specific moral judgment, like torturing fluffy kittens for fun is the epitome of evil? As seriously, who would disagree? But we can't agree on why it's wrong. Is it the suffering, the violation of some inherent right to not be a feline punching bag? Or is it just that the sound of meowing in agony clashes with our finely tuned sense of aesthetics? Okay, maybe not that last one. If we're all on the same page about the what, but miles apart on the why, does that undermine our neat categories of objectivism and relativism? It's like a group of art critics unanimously agreeing that a painting is a masterpiece, but having wildly different interpretations of its meaning. Here's where I throw my own philosophical hat into the ring. These aren't just abstract puzzles designed to make our brains sweat. They reflect real-world dilemmas. And if we can trace our disagreements back to a shared foundation of fundamental principles, even if we apply them in different ways, it might actually be a point in favor of some form of objectivism. It suggests that beneath the surface of our apparent disagreements, there might be a deeper current of shared moral understanding. Think of it like discovering that two people arguing about the best way to bake a cake actually agree on the essential ingredients. But this brings us to a critical distinction, a fork in the philosophical road. When we talk about something being objective, in the realm of morality we might mean one of two things. One, mind independent, like the law of gravity, it exists and operates whether we believe in it or not. It's an external reality, not a product of our opinions or feelings. Two, universally applicable, it holds true for everyone, everywhere, at all times, no exceptions, no cultural variations. It's a one-size-fits-all moral code. Now, someone who calls themselves a moral objectivist might have either of these meanings in mind. But I suspect that when relativists raise their "it's all relative" banner, they're primarily taking issue with the second meaning. They might be perfectly comfortable with moral principles existing out there, like objective facts of the universe, as long as those principles don't dictate a rigid, universal code of conduct that ignores cultural nuances. It's like saying, sure, there are fundamental principles of music, but that doesn't mean everyone has to play the same tune. And now for a question that's been lurking in the shadows, a real philosophical enigma. What is this thing we call morality, anyway? And is it possible that it's not a single, unified entity, but rather a patchwork quilt of different principles, some objective, some relative, and some just expressions of our emotions? In my previous lecture, I presented it as a competition. Objectivism vs relativism vs emotivism, as if we were trying to determine the ultimate champion of moral theories. But, as some of you brilliantly pointed out, that's like asking who's the best athlete across completely different sports. Bayern Munich is soccer, the Miami Heat basketball, and Serena Williams is tennis. They're all phenomenal, but in their own domains. So, is asking which moral theory is best a similarly flawed question? Is it like trying to judge a beauty pageant where the contestants are a fish, a bird, and a mammal? Here's the truth: I acknowledge that our moral judgments often spring from different sources, like different tributaries feeding into a larger river. Sometimes, especially when we're pondering how to structure society, we're driven by the principle of the greatest good for the greatest number, like a utilitarian legislator crafting policy. Other times, we're guided by our inner conscience, asking ourselves, what would violate my deeply held convictions, or what action would be logically inconsistent? And still other times, our moral compass seems to be calibrated by religious beliefs, prompting us to ask, what would align with the teachings of my faith? Or, what would be pleasing to my God? So, yes, morality can feel like a fragmented landscape with different terrains and different rules of engagement. But here's where many philosophers have sought to find a unifying thread, a common denominator. They've proposed that morality, at its core, is distinguished by at least two key features. 1. Agent neutrality. Moral reasons are supposed to be impartial, applying equally to anyone in a similar situation, regardless of their personal desires or circumstances. It's not about what benefits me, but what's right, objectively speaking. It is not relative to a particular individual. 2. Overridingness. When it comes down to it, moral reasons are supposed to outweigh all other considerations. Sure, you might have reasons to act in a way that's profitable, pleasurable, or beneficial to your loved ones. But if those reasons clash with a moral imperative, the moral imperative wins. It's the ultimate trump card. Now, If these two characteristics truly capture the essence of morality, and that's a big, a philosophical leap of faith, if you will, then it would be quite strange if some parts of this unified domain were governed by relativism, others by objectivism, and still others by emotivism. It would be like having a country where different regions operate under entirely different legal systems, a recipe for chaos. This is just a philosophical hunch, a tentative hypothesis, not a definitive proof. But it's this hunch that led me to suggest that it's unlikely for each theory to be correct about its own isolated compartment of morality. I don't believe any of these theories are flawless in their current form. They all likely need refinement, and perhaps the true theory is a hybrid, a synthesis, or something altogether new that we haven't even conceived of yet. But it would feel profoundly unsatisfying, at least to my philosophical sensibilities, if there weren't a single, overarching theory that could account for this realm of cogent, neutral, and overriding reasons. However, and this is crucial, that very notion of a unified domain of agent, neutral, and overriding reasons might be mistaken. That's the beauty and the challenge of philosophy. Everything is open to question, everything is up for debate. So, let's keep those philosophical engines humming, keep the discussions vibrant and thought-provoking, and continue to explore these fascinating puzzles together. Thanks for embarking on this intellectual adventure with me.